Okay, ladies and gents, good afternoon. We're here for the IA launch together. Um, this is our last remote long session of the year, which is highly exciting, obviously. Now, if I can just show you what the plan is for today, then um, we have first of all our outcome, which is that everybody in the class, by the end of this session, by the end of today's double, will have chosen an independent and dependent variable for their internal assessment. That's quite a big aim, but we're going to do our best to get there together. Now, how is that going to break itself down in terms of time? One thing that I took from feedback from my class is that you guys would like us to think very carefully about the amount of work we're giving you and how long it should take. Therefore, here's our time planning for today. As I would present it on my own lesson plans. We have our first 5 minutes to introduce the IA, finding out what the report actually means. So kind of what do we need to convey in our internal assessment? We need to rediscover the criteria. I've chosen that word because you guys had the opportunity to come into contact with them for the first time when we went to high-end Boycott. Part of this, you guys are going to need to mark an assessment against the IA criteria. All of the files that you need are uploaded to ManageBack. After you've had some time to do that, I'll be offering my feedback. It's one of my old IAs. Not mine, obviously, but it's one from my class from a few years ago. I want to just talk you through what the major successes and shortcomings were. We'll have kind of tips and tops, winners and sinners, shortcut to writing an outstanding internal assessment. And then finally, we'll take a first look at where the IA happens. That is going to be covered in this video for the first period. In the second period, you guys will go on to the second video, which goes into more depth about areas for investigation, variables and equipment, and then you'll be finishing off today's double period on Teams live with your class teacher with a bit of Q&A, also the opportunity to speak to each other to help everyone in the class choose an independent and a dependent variable. So, there we are. So, first things first, what is the purpose of the written IA report? Well, you need to start by identifying an ecological problem of global significance that might be having an impact on a local ecosystem. For instance, global significance, acid deposition. You guys all know about acid rain. Might be having an impact on a local ecosystem. Well, think about acid deposition by the side of a road. You have a man-made interference, which is our road, impacting a local ecosystem, which is the forest next to the road, because acid is being deposited, and that acid deposition is a problem of global significance. And there are heaps of these, and we've got lists of them later, believe it or not. You then write a plan to run this investigation. You collect, process, and present data just the way that we did in High and Boycott, so nothing new, which shows the answer to the research question and also shows you how much you can expect to trust the answer. We'll evaluate the effectiveness of what you did, and then at the end in the application section, you will suggest one change that the gemeente or the Staatsbosbeheer can make to their management of the area of investigation based upon your findings. So this is the purpose of the IA report. It's basically a lab report with a big fat context section at the start and a big fat evaluation and application section at the end. There's very little of this should be that new or that terrifying. Now, nice and on time. The criteria, you guys can see that there are a bunch of criteria, most of which have 6 marks each. Applications has 3 marks, and then communication is given 3 marks at the end. That's obviously the quality of what you've written is graded as a communication piece. And as I've said, the criteria can be found in the internal assessment folder. Now, let's go on to what can be found in the internal assessments folder. If you guys take a look, you will be able to find a file called sample ESS IA. I'm going to just zoom out. Now, as I said, this is an anonymized piece of work that was submitted a few years ago. Your first task is to go through this, planning. Well, obviously starts with context. Think about that from a communication point of view. This has already cost someone a mark. Onto hypothesis, variables, materials, safety precautions, method, results, quantitative data, tables, calculations, presentation, processing, conclusion, discussion, evaluation, and applications and bibliography. This is a good example of an internal assessment. This is not a perfect IA. This did not score somebody a 7 out of 7. I'm not sharing it with you because it's an exemplar piece of work. I'm sharing it with you because it's a good piece of work. It's an interesting piece of work to mark. Now, you have this sample ESS IA and you have the internal assessment criteria. And as you guys can see here, identifying the context. All that you need to do is individually or in a pair, you need to go through and you need to mark this. We're 6 and a bit minutes in now, so what I want you to do is I want you to pause this video for 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, I want you to go through this IA and I want you to grade it against all of the criteria. When you have a final grade, and you can do this independently or you can do this with 1 or 2 other people, so working maximum in groups of 3, I would like you to press play again. So we're going to hit pause in 3, 2, 1, pause. You've now hopefully taken that time to look at your work. Pause is off and you guys are back at it. You will be able now to open, well yeah, you could then as well, I guess, it's a big surprise, the sample ESS IA with comments. Now, these are the comments that I sent off to the moderator. You'll recognise my terrible handwriting. And another reason you've got this one is that this was a piece of work, to be fair, like all the other pieces of work from the last 3 years, whose mark has not been changed. So these comments were accepted by the examiner, and that's something that you need to know. Now, if we take a look on down, broadly speaking, you can see that the context section, strand 1, strand 2, and strand 3 have scored relatively well. Top band, middle band, leaving my person to score a 5 for context. You guys can see that on the way through planning, strand 3 scores a 4 with the risks described but not explained. The method, strand 1, scores a 5 to 6 because it's appropriate, it's repeatable, it will gather sufficient relevant data. But our second strand, strand 2, it's more described. The sampling strategy is more described than it is explained or justified, and that's super limiting. Okay, stops me awarding a 5 and means I can only award a 4 overall. So, first point, justification of sampling strategy is very, very, very important. Okay, if you haven't justified, if you haven't said why you did a transect or why you did a random area comparison, then you're going to massively lose marks in planning. And this is the new thing since you guys were in NYP. This is the new thing you have to do, so it deserves some attention. You'll notice that the student puts X's on maps, and that is very, very important, okay? It makes the experiment repeatable. This is a real top. This is a real good thing to do, okay? You have to be specific, okay? Start at point X on the map in the woodland area, and let's go down. Oh, happy Christmas. I can find part X on the map in the woodland area. This makes the experiment repeatable. No idea why it skips to black and white, but yeah, you have to forgive me for that, I'm afraid. Repeat in the area 5 times. I'm starting to gather sufficient data. Now let's move on. These raw data tables are not ideal. The raw data should all be given in one massive table. It should not be one table per trial. So this is another sort of common crime, if you like. This is another thing that people do on a regular basis that doesn't work out so well. One table to contain the raw data, ideally from both areas, woodland and not. However, the qualitative data which is here is really great. There are photographs of the experiment, and each photograph is referred to in a short paragraph of text. This is like really great work. So this is a good top, I guess, a good recommendation from this piece of work. Data processing is shown reasonably well. Calculating the average, calculating the standard deviation is shown. There's a little bit spoken about why the standard deviation is important. However, I would really like to see that up here. So calculating the standard deviation. I will calculate the standard deviation because this allows me to see the magnitude or the size of the error in the results. It allows me to see how much variation there is between my different trials. It allows me to see whether or not the difference in means is significant, and it also allows me to calculate a t-test, or to use the t-test. This is what I would put there for calculating standard deviation. Fortunately, you guys have this recorded. Now, obviously, it differs depending on what you've done, but putting something in this section is a really good idea to justify why your calculations are being carried out. The graph is beautiful, and I wanted you to see this because it looks too simple, I think. Or I think a lot of you would look at this and think, oh, it's only a bar graph. I'll do a bar graph in grade 9. But it's the right graph type for the data. It's woodland versus grassland, A versus B. So the graph type is appropriate, it's well drawn, it's accurate. I understand it by looking at it. I see it's got standard deviations marked on it. Now, let's scooch down. We use a t-test. However, the student has not checked their working out. So the t-test value is a bit dodgy. It's very important to go through and to calculate this properly. Okay? Now, it's important to check your calculations. It's important to have someone else check your calculations. You can have me check your calculations if you want to. If you bring it to me and say, or your teacher, and say, sir or miss, can you please check this for me? Then the answer will be yes. So make use of that, please. However, if you leave your t-test and you don't submit it as part of your draft, then it means that we can't check it. So try and put a real emphasis on your data processing before the summer, because that's the last section that you need to have written in full of the IA before you hand it in. Now, let's go a little bit on. Sorry for my scrolling issues. It's good that the t-test value is used, it just isn't correct. On to the conclusion. The conclusion is fine, but you can see here that the validity is not explored. So it means that the conclusion doesn't discuss the data. It doesn't use anything about the respectable relative sizes of the error bars, and it's very important to discuss that. Finally, evaluation. It's kind of nice. Conclusion is at least partially evaluated in context. This is something I like to see. This is a real safety net for your evaluation. If you just make a table with limitation, impact on data, and future solution, and put 3 significant limitations of your experiment or your approach or your practical work or whatever it turns out to be, then you get at least a 4 for this strand of your evaluation. And it saves you a whole bunch of words as well, which is great. Finally, it would be ideal if this person had titled this as application However, they haven't, so whatever. That application is good. There's a discussion carried out, and we're into. Oh, apologies, people. I had a bit of a scrolling ish. There we are, and maybe also a little bit of a page ordering issue, my lord. But we're in the right place now. We have our application, and we're in a good space. Now, we're going to leave that one be. If you have any further questions about this piece of work, if there are things that you've seen or you kind of wonder, is this a good idea or not a good idea, then please do ask us what we think of this piece of work or what we think of a particular aspect of it when we get into the Q&A part later on. Now, I'm just going to show you here. This is a checklist that we wrote for the written report. And these are some tips or some good ideas for every single strand in the investigation. Between now and the time that we go out together at the end of June, we're going to be writing the context and planning sections. So these areas, if you like, are the areas that you need to pay particular attention to. And in terms of common crimes, in terms of tips and tops, I'm going to say nothing more than make sure that you've looked to here, make sure that you've asked questions, and make sure that you are, make sure that you're comfortable with the quality of what you've written. You can see, obviously, as we go on, that results, analysis, conclusion, discussion, evaluation, applications, and communication come in right here. If you would like to see some internal assessments that maybe don't do things so well, I've put you 2 examples in of IAs that didn't score so nicely from the past. Here we have a very short internal assessment where the student has chosen to write only about 1,400 words, so they left the word limit is 2,250. That's what you should be aiming for. And we have a huge number of crimes in here. How does the distance from a man-made interruption in the environment affect the biodiversity of an area? Well, my lord. Is that an oil platform in the sea? Is that a school building in the middle of a meadow? Is that a road going through a forest? Is that a train line going through a desert? Who knows? Okay? Is it plant diversity? Is it animal diversity? Man-made interruption? Oh. We can see here that we have magic words that are relied upon. Deforestation is when humans cut down or even completely wipe out natural areas. Well, bear in mind the audience you're writing for, right? These are IB examiners, these are DP examiners, so do your best to treat them well. There are a few nice things. In just 3 months, 453 hectares of untouched forest was destroyed near a town in Peru because a highway is being built. It's fantastic. They've picked one specific moment to reference, but this is what a 1 out of 6 context section looks like. And again, these marks were agreed with by the examiner. I can't give people bonus points, sadly, just because I like them, because this was a nice person. Huh? It just goes. I have to know that the examiner is going to accept what I write on the page. It also, by the way, doesn't help that the student offered no connections between the research question and the context. We had a little bit of good work in the variable section, but again, really not helped by the fact that we had such a vague research question. Data collection doesn't plan to collect enough data, which means that I can't award sufficient relevant, which limits planning really, at least for the first strand, at a 3. They do, however, do a few things well. They show a sampling strategy. That's nice. They talk about some sensible Safety and ethical issues, mentioning, for instance, you check for ticks after you're working in long grass. It makes sense. You're careful for bikes around you. It makes sense. It's good. Okay, that saves their bacon a bit. Putting their planning mark up to 3. They do make errors in recording their data. There's gaps, for instance, which is not so handy, but they do put all their data at least in one table. They've had a crack at calculations, although they've used the incorrect notation for our language. 0.20 is the English notation. 0.20 is typically continental European. It does make a difference because the language that it's written in isn't Dutch or German or French, so the numerical language should also match. Applications go on to people. I'm not going to spend too long on this discussion. I mean, you can see, right? Here's the evaluation. It's that you know it's not going to go well. Okay. The conclusion is kind of fine. There's the wrong graph type. There are only 3 distances, 0, 1, and 2, not 5 distances necessary for making a scatter plot. You guys know it, okay? And I'm gonna do my best not to bang on for too long because I'm a few minutes in debt. So we're gonna get a move on. And we're gonna get a move on in the direction of our PowerPoint. And we're coming back to these areas. So what do we have? We will be doing our work in the Corvus boss. Basically the space within the bounds of these roads. The entire place is managed by the Staatsbosbeheer here. The entire place is part of a Natuurmonument. We also, if we wish, have access to the industrial area just by the side. We have access to the body of water that runs along the Zuidereinde. We have access to the body of water to the canal that runs along the Bierensteinseweg, the Groeisevaart. And I think this is a Schravenlandsvaart, but I'm not quite sure. Every area is shown on an annotated map, which you guys will have access to. And this is your thinking point between now and when we go for break, or between now and when you come back after break, because I reckon that I've spoken for 23 out of 25 minutes, given that you had 20 minutes to do something else, so I'm going to be very quick. It's an area of managed forest with a mix of native and non-native plants. There are watercourses throughout, there are paths throughout, there are trees, benches, picnic tables, there are all manner of different interruptions in this space. And your job is to think about how the management or human interaction with this space, either in the Corvus boss or in the watercourses surrounding it, or maybe in the industrial area, how is the sustainability or the biodiversity affected by preservation or conservation? How does human development or pollution, especially at the edges, influence the land or the water? God, that's embarrassing. How do paths that go through the Corvus boss influence maybe biodiversity? How do they influence the soil? How do they influence the water? How do they influence nutrient cycles? Let these words swoosh around in your brain over break, and then I'd like you guys, when you come back and turn this on, to be ready to think about independent and dependent variables and what we might go about investigating in the Corvus boss. Have a nice break time, people. We'll see you in 15 minutes.